The moment that crisp dollar bill hit the polished floor at my feet, I knew my marriage was over. But what I didn't know was that I held all the cards to destroy both of them completely. Let me tell you how a single insult at a corporate party became the opening move in a game of revenge that would leave two people's lives in ruins, and how the working man they underestimated walked away victorious. My metal shop in Birmingham smells like scorched steel, machine oil, and honest sweat. It's an authentic smell, the kind you can't fake with expensive cologne. Here, surrounded by the shower of sparks from welding torches and the thunderous rhythm of hydraulic presses, I feel alive and real. I know every bolt, every weld seam on these structures we build. This is where I belong, where my hands create something permanent, something that matters. But at home, the air was different. It reeked of expensive perfume, cold marble surfaces, and a silence that pressed on my eardrums harder than any industrial press ever could. Linda, my wife of 12 years. Lately, she looked at me the way you'd look at an oil stain on a white silk dress, something offensive that needed to be removed. She lived in Atlanta, in a world of glass offices and manufactured smiles, coming home only to remind me how beneath her level I was with my blue-collar existence. The transformation had been gradual, so slow I didn't notice until it was too late. First, it was comments about my clothes, then about my friends, then about my work. "Must you always smell like metal?" she'd say, wrinkling her nose when I came home. "Can't you shower at the shop before coming to the house?" Like I was contaminating her precious space with my working-class filth. We lived under the same roof, but between us stretched a chasm the size of the Grand Canyon. I stayed quiet. I always stay quiet until there's a good reason not to. My daddy taught me that silence can be a weapon if you know how to use it. Let people talk themselves into corners while you watch and wait. But the silence between Linda and me wasn't strategic anymore. It was just empty, hollow, like a building with all the support beams removed, waiting to collapse. The shop floor is where I belong, where things make sense. Metal doesn't lie to you. It bends or it breaks, and you always know which one it's going to do if you understand the material. People aren't like that. People smile while they sharpen the knife they're planning to stick in your back. But I learned something working with steel all these years. Pressure reveals true character. Apply enough force, and you'll see what something is really made of. Linda had been different when we met. Back then, she was a secretary at a small accounting firm, and I was building my business from nothing. She'd come to the shop sometimes, bringing me lunch, laughing at the metal dust in my hair. We'd sit on the loading dock, eating sandwiches and talking about our dreams. Her dreams then were simple, human, a nice house, kids maybe, stability. I gave her all of that and more. The house came first, a beautiful colonial I'd bought and renovated myself. Then the cars, then the lifestyle. And somewhere in all that giving, she stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a provider, then as an obstacle, and finally as an embarrassment. The change really accelerated about 2 years ago when she got the promotion to marketing director. Suddenly, she was traveling to Atlanta 3-4 nights a week. Coming home later and later on the weekends, she did show up. Her clothes got more expensive. Her attitude got colder. She'd snap at me for the smallest things. I left a coffee cup in the sink once, and she went on a 20-minute tirade about my lack of respect for her space. Her space. In the house I'd bought. I tried. God knows I tried. I'd plan nice dinners at home, but she'd cancel at the last minute with some emergency meeting. I'd suggest weekend getaways, but she was always too busy, too tired, too something. The physical side of our marriage had dried up completely about a year ago. She'd moved into the guest bedroom, claiming my snoring kept her awake. I didn't snore, but I didn't argue. What was the point? There were signs I should have caught earlier. The way she'd angle her phone away when texting. The new lingerie I'd find in the laundry. Pieces I'd never seen her wear around me. The sudden interest in working out, dropping 15 pounds and getting her hair done every week at some expensive salon in Atlanta. She was dressing up for someone, just not for me. I knew it in my gut but didn't want to face it. Denial is a comfortable blanket until someone rips it off and leaves you freezing in the truth. It happened on a Tuesday evening in late September. Linda walked into my home office and tossed an envelope onto my desk. The gold embossing caught the lamplight. Silver Crown Hotel, Atlanta, the corporate event of the year for her company. "You have to go, Ethan," she said in that tone people use when they're giving orders to the help. "I need someone for photos. Just put on a tuxedo and don't talk about your pipes and beams." I felt the muscles in my neck tighten, that familiar tension that comes before something bad. I hated these gatherings with every fiber of my being. Rooms full of people who thought their business cards made them superior to someone who actually built things with his hands. But there was something strange in her eyes as she stood there. Something that looked like anticipation mixed with defiance. A challenge, maybe. Or the confidence of someone who knows they're about to win. My gut, honed by years of reading situations and people, told me I needed to be there. Not for her sake, but for mine. When a hunter senses something's wrong in the forest, he doesn't ignore it. He moves quieter, watches closer, and waits for his prey to reveal itself. "I'll be there," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She seemed surprised, maybe even disappointed that I didn't put up a fight. She left the room quickly, and I heard her on the phone minutes later, her voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The tone told me everything. The Silver Crown Hotel blazed like a jewelry store window display when we arrived that Saturday night. Crystal chandeliers threw rainbow prisms across marble floors that were so polished you could see your reflection. Waiters moved through the crowd with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes, balancing trays of champagne that probably cost more per bottle than my workers made in a day. Women wore jewelry worth more than most people's annual salary, and the men treated their Rolex watches like they were Purple Hearts earned in combat, rather than accessories bought with daddy's money or corporate bonuses. I felt like a bear that had wandered into a china shop. The rental tuxedo pinched at my shoulders because they're too broad for this designer garbage. My hands, scarred and calloused from decades of real work, looked out of place holding the delicate champagne flute. Every time someone's eyes landed on me, I could see them doing the mental calculation, trying to figure out who I was and why I was there. Then they'd notice Linda and understanding would dawn. "Oh, he's with her. How unfortunate for her." I was an intruder in their sanitized world, and they made sure I knew it with their sidelong glances and condescending smiles. A woman in a dress that probably cost $5,000 actually wrinkled her nose when I passed, like she could smell the honest work on me, even through the shower I'd taken and the cologne Linda had insisted I wear. A group of men in their expensive suits stopped talking when I approached the bar, their silence louder than any insult. Linda fluttered through the ballroom like a butterfly that had finally escaped a cocoon. The moment we crossed the threshold, she slipped her hand out of mine with a little shudder, like touching me had contaminated her. She vanished into the crowd without a word, without even a backward glance. I was left standing alone with a glass of lukewarm champagne, watching my wife laugh at jokes told by people who'd never held anything heavier than a Mont Blanc pen in their soft, manicured hands. She was different here, animated, alive. Her laugh was louder, freer. She touched arms, leaned in close to whisper, threw her head back in exaggerated mirth at comments that couldn't possibly be that funny. This was the real Linda, I realized. Or maybe this was the new Linda, the one who'd replaced the woman I married. Either way, she belonged here in a way she never belonged with me anymore. I was invisible to her, a shadow, an accessory she'd left in the coat check and forgotten about. I watched her work the room, touching arms, throwing her head back in exaggerated laughter, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. She was ashamed of me, not disappointed, not frustrated, ashamed. I represented everything she wanted to leave behind, every rung of the ladder she'd climbed to get here. Looking at me forced her to remember where she came from, and she hated that. The bartender, a young guy with tired eyes, who probably had more in common with me than anyone else in that room, poured me a whiskey without being asked. "Rough night?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the classical music and artificial laughter. "Getting there," I said, and he nodded like he understood everything. Maybe he did. Service industry people see the truth behind the mask better than anyone. They're invisible too, just like me, watching the theater of the wealthy and connected from the wings. I've worked about 50 of these parties, he said while wiping down the bar, and I can always spot the ones who don't belong. Not because you're not good enough, because you're too real for this fake-ass crowd. I almost smiled at that. Almost. Then he appeared. Caleb. I spotted him immediately because I've been sizing up men my entire life. You learn to do that in my business. Figure out who's solid and who's all show. This one was all show. Expensive suit that fit too perfectly, probably tailored specifically for his frame. Spray tan that looked orange under certain lights. Hair styled with product that cost more than a working man's weekly groceries. In the eyes of someone who believes the world owes him whatever he wants. He was maybe 38, 10 years younger than me, with the kind of physique that came from a personal trainer and supplements rather than real work. Muscles that looked good in a suit but would be useless for actually moving weight or building anything. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of ownership, and people parted for him like he was royalty. I watched him approach Linda, and my jaw tightened. This wasn't a colleague greeting another colleague. This was a predator approaching prey he'd already marked as his. His hand slid around her waist, settling too low, too familiar. She didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she bloomed under his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. They exchanged looks that spoke of shared secrets and private moments. This wasn't the spark of new attraction. This was a fire that had been burning for a while, probably in hotel rooms I'd paid for with my hard-earned money. I stood 20 feet away, holding my whiskey, and watched my wife betray me in front of 100 people who didn't care enough to even notice. Or maybe they did notice and simply didn't care. The rich have different rules, different morals. Loyalty is just another commodity they trade when it's convenient. They whispered to each other, their bodies angled away from the crowd in the universal body language of conspiracy. She touched his chest, laughing at something he said. His hand moved lower on her hip. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not rage exactly, but something worse. Clarity. The kind of cold, clear thinking that comes when you finally stop lying to yourself. I took a long drink of my whiskey and waited. Patience is something you learn in my line of work. You can't rush steel. You have to wait for the right temperature, the right moment. Rush it and everything fails. Wait for the perfect moment and you can shape metal into anything you want. They came to me eventually. Of course they did. Predators can't resist showing off their kill. Caleb held his whiskey glass like it was a scepter, like it gave him power over everyone in the room. Linda was practically glued to his side, her hand resting possessively on his arm, her body language screaming ownership. They'd been working the room together, and I'd watched them getting progressively bolder, more obvious. A touch here, a whispered comment there, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. Now they were putting on a show, and I was the entertainment. He looked at me the way people look at furniture, as something in the way rather than someone worth acknowledging. His eyes traveled from my rental shoes to my off-the-rack tuxedo to my weathered face, taking inventory of everything wrong with me, cataloging every way I fell short of his standards. "So this is your husband?" he asked Linda, finally letting his gaze slide over me with barely concealed disgust. He said the word husband like it was something distasteful he had to spit out. "He looks sturdy enough. I bet he's great at lifting heavy boxes. Do you lift boxes, buddy? Or is it more grunt work than that?" A few people nearby had stopped their conversations to watch. I could feel their eyes on us, sensing drama, smelling blood in the water. This was entertainment for them, a little scandal to spice up their boring corporate evening. Linda giggled. Actually giggled like a schoolgirl with a crush. That sound cut through me like a plasma torch through aluminum. It wasn't just cruel, it was dismissive, like I was a joke they'd been sharing for months and I was only now getting to hear the punchline. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with champagne and cruelty. This was fun for her, humiliating me in front of her colleagues, showing them all how much better she could do, how far she'd risen above the working-class man she'd married when she didn't know any better. "Ethan works in construction," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "He's very good with his hands. Manual labor, you know." She emphasized the words manual labor like they were a punchline. A couple of women nearby tittered behind their hands. Caleb smirked, that self-satisfied expression that comes from a lifetime of privilege and never being told no. Manual labor. How quaint. So you're basically a really well-paid janitor, is that it? You clean up other people's messes? More laughter from the growing crowd. They were gathering now, drawn by the spectacle like sharks to chum. I recognized some of Linda's co-workers, people I'd met at holiday parties, people who'd shaken my hand and smiled to my face. Now they were watching me get gutted and enjoying every second of it. Caleb reached into his pocket with theatrical slowness, making sure everyone was watching. He pulled out a crumpled $1 bill and held it up between two fingers like it was contaminated, like touching it might give him some disease associated with poverty. The crowd went silent, anticipating what was coming. He dropped it. The bill floated down through the air in slow motion, spinning lazily, landing on the polished floor at my feet with a soft whisper of paper on marble. The sound echoed in the sudden silence louder than a gunshot. "Here you go, buddy," he said with a smirk that showed too many teeth. His voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, pitched for maximum humiliation. "Buy yourself a beer somewhere in the back alley where you belong. Maybe a hot dog from a street vendor. I'll take care of your wife tonight. She deserves someone in her league, someone who knows which fork to use at dinner, someone who can actually give her the life she deserves instead of dragging her down to your level." The ballroom went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that marble floor. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Everyone was watching now, at least 50 people, maybe more. This was the moment they'd all talk about at Monday's water cooler. "Did you see what happened to Linda's husband?" Oh my God, it was so awkward. He just stood there and took it. Linda wasn't just laughing anymore. She was nearly doubled over, one hand on Caleb's arm for support, while she cackled like she'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. Real tears streamed down her face from laughing so hard. My wife, the woman who'd promised to love and honor me. She was laughing while another man threw money at me like I was a panhandler, like I was beneath even acknowledging as a human being. Some people in the crowd looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, glancing away. But most of them were smiling, enjoying the show. This was what passed for entertainment in their world. Public humiliation, cruelty dressed up as humor, proving dominance through degradation. A woman in a red dress whispered something to her companion, and they both laughed. A man with silver hair shook his head, smirking. Even the waiters had stopped moving, frozen in place, watching the spectacle unfold. I was the circus, the freak show, the entertainment they'd remember long after they forgot the expensive food and free champagne. I looked at that dollar bill on the floor. Part of me, the part that was still civilized, wanted to turn and walk away. Maintain my dignity, take the high road. But there's another part of me, the part that learned to survive in a world where weakness gets you killed, and that part knew exactly what to do. I bent down slowly. My knees cracked from years of hard labor, but my hand was steady as a rock when I picked up that dollar. It was warm from his pocket and wrinkled. I smoothed it out carefully, taking my time, making them wait. Then I looked up at Caleb. Really looked at him. The way you look at a target before you pull the trigger. "You just bought yourself a world of trouble, son," I said quietly. My voice didn't rise, didn't need to. 30 years of commanding work crews taught me that real authority doesn't need volume. "And you're going to pay a lot more than $1 before this is over." He laughed. Linda laughed. The crowd around us laughed. They turned away, dismissing me completely, and walked off together. Her hand was in his back pocket, bold as brass. Right there in front of everyone. The message was clear. I didn't matter. I never mattered. I folded that dollar bill carefully and put it in my pocket. Then I walked out of the Silver Crown Hotel with my head up and my shoulders straight. Behind me, I could hear the party continuing like nothing had happened. And maybe to them, nothing had. Just a little entertainment, a bit of cruel sport at the expense of the blue-collar nobody who didn't belong there anyway. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd assumed that because I worked with my hands, I was stupid. That because I didn't play their corporate games, I didn't understand how power really worked. They were about to learn that intelligence isn't measured by the price of your suit or the university on your diploma. Real intelligence is knowing how to break things down and build them back up the way you want them. I didn't go home that night. Home was compromised, tainted. Instead, I drove straight to my shop, the place where I'd always been able to think clearly. The familiar route calmed me slightly. The streets empty at this hour, just me and the occasional semi-truck hauling goods through the night. Working people, honest people, my people. I stripped off that uncomfortable tuxedo in the locker room, threw it in the trash where it belonged, and pulled on my work clothes. Denim and steel-toed boots, the uniform of honest labor. The moment those boots were laced up, I felt more like myself than I had in hours. This was my armor, my true skin. Then I fired up the welding equipment and worked through the night. The familiar shower of sparks calmed something primal in me. The smell of burning metal grounded me back to reality. The intense heat that made sweat pour down my face was cleansing, burning away the humiliation and leaving something harder behind. I cut steel. I welded joints. I built structures that would stand for decades. And with every strike of the hammer, every blast of the torch, I built something else too, a plan. The physical work helped me think. My hands knew what to do without conscious thought, leaving my mind free to process everything. I kept seeing that dollar bill floating down, kept hearing Linda's laughter, kept feeling the weight of all those eyes watching me get humiliated. But instead of rage, which would have been useless, I felt something colder settling into my bones. Calculation, strategy, purpose. Metal doesn't forgive mistakes, and neither would I. Every weld had to be perfect, every measurement exact. Just like the revenge I was constructing in my mind. There would be no room for error, no chance for them to wiggle out. When steel fails, it fails completely, catastrophically. When I was done with them, they'd understand what complete failure felt like. Around 3 a.m, I took a break and sat on the loading dock, drinking coffee so strong it could strip paint. The night was cool, quiet except for the distant sound of highway traffic. I thought about the last 12 years, really thought about them for the first time. How many signs had I missed? How many lies had I swallowed? How many nights had she claimed to work late while she was actually in some hotel room with him? The betrayal hurt. But what hurt worse was realizing I'd let it happen. I'd been so focused on building my business, on providing for her, on being the husband I thought she wanted, that I'd failed to notice she'd stopped wanting a husband at all. She wanted a wallet, a fool, someone she could use and discard when something better came along. Well, she'd made her choice. Now she'd live with the consequences. By 4 a.m, I'd worked through the initial shock and anger. My mind was clear and cold as the steel bars cooling on my workbench. I knew exactly what needed to be done, step by step, piece by piece. I'd build their destruction the same way I built everything else, carefully, precisely, and built to last. I pulled out my phone and started making a list. Every asset we owned jointly, every account she had access to, every piece of leverage I could use. I photographed bank statements I'd brought from home. I started documenting everything, building a case the way you build a foundation, from the ground up, solid and unshakable. The sun was coming up when I finally turned off the equipment, painting the sky in shades of orange and red through the high windows of the shop. My muscles ached in that good way that comes from honest work. My eyes burned from the welding flash. But my mind was clear and focused. I knew exactly what needed to be done. Linda came home at 10 a.m. I heard her car pull up, that white Mercedes I'd helped her buy 2 years ago when she got the promotion. The one she loved more than she'd ever loved me. I was sitting at the kitchen table, exactly where I'd positioned myself an hour earlier, waiting. I'd showered and changed, put on clean clothes, made myself presentable. I wanted to look her in the eye when she tried to lie to me. She walked in wearing a man's blazer, way too big in the shoulders, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Caleb's jacket, obviously. She hadn't even bothered to ditch it before coming home. The arrogance of that, the sheer audacity, almost made me laugh. On her neck, which she tried to hide with the collar, was a hickey the size of a quarter. Dark purple against her pale skin. She looked tired and defensive, her makeup smeared, her hair a mess, her expensive dress wrinkled like she'd slept in it, which she probably had, just not at home. She saw me sitting there and froze for a second, her eyes going wide like a deer caught in headlights. Then her expression shifted, rearranging itself into something approximating innocence. The transformation was almost impressive. Years of corporate meetings had taught her how to put on a mask quickly. "Oh, Ethan, you're up early," she started, her voice too bright, too cheerful. "The party ran so late, and some of us girls decided to extend the night. You know how it is. We went to this amazing spa that one of the women knew about, and they did overnight treatments. It was incredible. And I should have called, but my phone died. I'm so sorry. I know you were probably worried." The lies tumbled out of her mouth in a practiced stream, overlapping each other, trying to bury the truth under an avalanche of false details. She'd probably rehearsed them on the drive home, creating her alibi, building her story, but her voice shook. Her hands trembled. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine, darting around the kitchen like she was looking for an escape route. I sat there drinking my black coffee, not saying a word, just watching her perform, letting her dig the hole deeper. Every word was another shovel of dirt. She kept talking, adding more details, more lies, making it worse. The spa had cucumber water. They did hot stone massages. Someone named Jennifer had too much wine and fell asleep in the sauna. None of it mattered. None of it was true. When she finally ran out of steam, I took a slow sip of my coffee and set the cup down with deliberate care. The sound of ceramic on wood was loud in the sudden silence. "Go take a shower, Linda," I said quietly, my voice flat and emotionless. "You stink of his cologne and cheap lies. And that hickey on your neck? You might want to use more makeup next time you decide to play me for a fool." Her hand flew to her neck, covering the mark. Her face went from fake cheerful to pale to red in the space of seconds. Emotions flickered across her features too fast to track. Shame, anger, fear, then defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "You're being paranoid and accusatory. This is exactly why our marriage is failing, Ethan. You never trust me. You're always so suspicious, so controlling. Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of your precious metal shop, I wouldn't have to find emotional support elsewhere." There it was, the deflection, the blame shift. Somehow this was my fault. I'd driven her to it by working too much, by not being attentive enough, by being who I was. I laughed, actually laughed, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it. "Emotional support, is that what we're calling it now? You came home wearing another man's jacket with his mark on your neck, and you want to talk about emotional support?" "Nothing happened," she was yelling now, her careful mask completely shattered. "You have no proof. You're just jealous because I have a successful career and friends and a life outside of this boring house and your boring metal shop." "Get out of my sight," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Go upstairs, shower, and start thinking about where you're going to live, because you're not staying here." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. Maybe she saw something in my eyes, some line she'd finally crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. She turned and stomped upstairs, her designer heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood. The bathroom door slammed with enough force to rattle the house. She thought this was just another fight, another moment of tension in our failing marriage. She thought she could shower away the evidence, put on fresh clothes, and we'd go back to our usual Cold War. She had no idea that the real battle hadn't even started yet. I sat there listening to the water run upstairs and thought about timing. In construction, timing is everything. Pour concrete too early, and it's weak. Too late, and it won't set properly. You have to wait for exactly the right moment. I'd waited 12 years. I could wait a few more hours. An hour later, she came downstairs dressed for success in one of her power suits. She'd covered the hickey with makeup and swept her hair to one side. Professional, polished, a complete transformation from the disheveled woman who'd stumbled in, wearing another man's jacket. "I have a meeting," she announced, not asking, not explaining, just informing me of her plans the way you'd inform a roommate. "Drive safe," I said, still not looking up from my paper. She hesitated, like she expected more of a confrontation. When it didn't come, she grabbed her keys and left. Her white Mercedes pulled out of the driveway with an aggressive rev of the engine. I waited exactly 5 minutes to make sure she wasn't coming back. Then I went to work. The locksmith arrived within the hour. Professional guy, didn't ask questions when I said I needed the locks changed immediately. We did every door, front and back. New deadbolts, new knobs, the works. While he worked, I started gathering Linda's belongings. I wasn't cruel about it. I folded her clothes neatly. I packed her shoes carefully in boxes. Her jewelry, her makeup, her books, everything that was hers went into suitcases and bags. I worked methodically, room by room, erasing her presence from my house. Because that's what it was. My house. I'd bought it before we married. In my name, my money, my property. By 3 in the afternoon, her entire life was packed and stacked on the front porch. Neat rows of luggage, like soldiers standing at attention. The locksmith finished up and handed me a new set of keys. I paid him in cash and gave him a generous tip for the quick work. Then I sat down on the porch swing and waited. The afternoon sun was warm. Birds sang in the trees. It was a beautiful day for a fresh start. Linda pulled up at 6, right on schedule. I watched her face through the windshield as she saw the luggage. Confusion first, her eyebrows knitting together. Then disbelief, her mouth falling open. Then pure rage, her face flushing red. She tried her key in the door. It didn't work. She tried again, jiggling it harder. Forced it. Nothing. The new locks held firm. She started pounding on the door with both fists. Ethan! Ethan, open this door right now! What the hell is going on? This is insane! You can't do this! Neighbors started peeking out of windows. Mrs. Chen from next door came out to water her garden, moving very slowly so she could watch the show. She'd never liked Linda, I realized. Linda had complained about her roses hanging over the fence, called code enforcement on her dog barking. Now Mrs. Chen was getting her entertainment. Mr. Rodriguez across the street suddenly needed to check his mailbox, then decided his hedges needed immediate trimming. The Johnsons' teenage son was suddenly very interested in washing his car in the driveway, taking his time, watching everything. I let Linda bang and yell for a full 2 minutes, letting the whole neighborhood hear her lose control. The professional, polished marketing director reduced to a screaming woman on a front porch. Then I opened the door slowly, calmly. I filled the doorway completely, my bulk blocking any view inside. Linda tried to push past me, actually put her hands on my chest and shoved. I didn't budge. It was like pushing against a steel beam. All those years of physical labor had built something she couldn't move. You're not the lady of this house anymore, I said calmly, my voice carrying just enough for the neighbors to hear. Your things are on the porch. Time to go. You can't do this. She was screaming now, her professional composure completely shattered. Her face was twisted with rage and something else. Maybe panic. This is my home. You can't just throw me out. I have rights. I'll call the police. It's my home. My name on the deed. Bought it 3 years before I married you. You want to call the cops? Go ahead. They'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. You're trespassing. Her face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Anger, disbelief, fear, then calculation. She switched tactics suddenly, trying tears. Her voice went from screaming to pleading in an instant. Baby, please, let's talk about this. Whatever you think happened, we can work through it. 12 years, Ethan. 12 years of marriage. You're going to throw that away because of some misunderstanding? Because you're jealous of my work friends? The crocodile tears didn't move me. I'd seen her practice her crying face in the mirror before big presentations, knew exactly how she manipulated emotions to get what she wanted. This was just another performance. I don't think anything, Linda. I know. Now take your bags and call your boyfriend. I'm sure Caleb will be happy to help you out. After all, he takes care of you, right? That's what he said last night, in front of everyone, while you laughed. The tears dried up instantly, like I'd flipped a switch. Her face hardened, the mask dropping completely. This was the real Linda, the one she'd been hiding for years. How dare you? Her voice was pure venom now. Nothing happened with Caleb. You're just paranoid and jealous because he's successful, and you're just a glorified mechanic. You work with your hands like some peasant while he makes real money, has real power. You've always been beneath me, Ethan. I settled for you, and this is how you treat me? There it was, the truth she'd been holding back for years. Finally out in the open. The contempt she really felt for me. The disgust. At least now we were being honest. At least now the pretense was gone. Mrs. Chen had stopped even pretending to water her plants. She was just standing there, mouth slightly open, taking it all in. Mr. Rodriguez had his phone out. Whether he was calling someone or recording this, I didn't know and didn't care. Let them all see. Let the whole neighborhood know what kind of woman she really was. Goodbye, Linda. You've got 5 minutes to start loading your car. After that, I'm calling the police for trespassing, and I'll have you arrested in front of all these nice people who are watching you fall apart. I closed the door. She screamed and pounded for another minute, the sound echoing through the quiet suburban street. Then I heard her start crying. Real tears this time, not the fake ones. The sound of someone realizing they destroyed everything and there was no going back. It's my home, my name on the deed. You want to call the cops? Go ahead. They'll tell you the same thing. Her face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Anger, disbelief, fear, then calculation. She switched tactics, trying tears. Baby, please, let's talk about this. Whatever you think happened. I don't think anything, Linda. I know. Now take your bags and call your boyfriend. I'm sure Caleb will be happy to help you out. After all, he takes care of you, right? That's what he said. The tears dried up instantly. How dare you? Nothing happened with Caleb. You're just paranoid and jealous because he's successful, and you're just a glorified mechanic. There it was. The truth she'd been holding back for years finally out in the open. The contempt she really felt for me. At least now we were being honest. Goodbye, Linda. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police for trespassing. I closed the door. She screamed and pounded for another minute. But when I didn't respond, she started dragging her bags to her car. It took her 3 trips. I watched through the window as she struggled with the luggage, refusing to help. She'd made her choices. Now she could live with them. When her taillights finally disappeared down the street, I poured myself a whiskey and called my lawyer. Then I called a private investigator I'd worked with years ago on a workers' comp fraud case. By 9 that night, I had both of them sitting at my kitchen table, legal pads and laptops spread out, and we were planning the real work. I need everything, I told the investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, who'd made a career out of finding things people wanted hidden. She was in her 50s, dressed casually but expensively, with eyes that missed nothing. Bank accounts, phone records, credit card statements, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, everything that shows where she's been, who she's been with, and how much of my money she spent doing it. I want to know every lie she's told, every time she's stolen from me, every moment of this affair documented in black and white. Rachel smiled, a predatory expression that reminded me why I'd hired her in the first place. Messy divorce? The messiest, I said, and I want to make sure it stays that way. I want her destroyed, professionally, financially, socially, everything. My lawyer, a bulldog named Marcus who'd helped me set up my business 15 years ago, was already pulling forms from his briefcase. He was a big guy, former college football player, with a mind like a steel trap and no tolerance for cheaters. Georgia's an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. That works in our favor, especially if we can prove infidelity and financial impropriety. The judges here don't look kindly on spouses who steal and cheat. Oh, we can prove it, I said. Trust me on that. I want every angle covered. I want this airtight. No room for her to wiggle out, no technicalities, no second chances. They worked fast. Rachel had connections everywhere. Banks, hotels, phone companies, rental car agencies, even some friendly faces in law enforcement who owed her favors. Within 48 hours, she'd compiled a dossier that would have made the FBI proud. Hundreds of pages of documentation, phone logs, financial records, surveillance photos, witness statements. It was beautiful and damning in its completeness. What they found was even better than I'd hoped. The affair had been going on for at least 2 years, maybe longer. Hotel rooms in Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, weekend trips they'd claimed were business conferences, dinners at expensive restaurants charged to corporate cards. Linda's successful career had been built on a foundation of lies and my money. For 3 years, she'd been systematically draining our joint accounts. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there. Amounts I wouldn't notice among the regular bills and business expenses, then larger sums as she got bolder. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. The money went to marketing expenses and business development costs for companies that didn't actually exist. She'd created fake companies, written checks to them from our joint account, and funneled the cash somewhere else. Rachel laid out a chart on my kitchen table showing the money trail. It was like a spider web, intricate and carefully constructed. "She's smart," Rachel said with grudging admiration. "She covered her tracks well, used multiple shell companies, different banks, even routed some money through offshore accounts. If you hadn't asked me to look, this could have gone on for years more." "But where did the money end up?" I asked, though I already had my suspicions. Rachel flipped to another page, and there it was. The recipient was a company called Prestige Consulting LLC, registered in Delaware. And guess who owned Prestige Consulting? Caleb Reynolds. My wife hadn't just been cheating on me. She'd been stealing from me to support her lover's failing business venture. Every fancy dinner where he'd impressed her with his success. Every expensive hotel room where they'd carried on their affair. Every designer suit that made him look like a successful executive. All of it was financed by me. I was unknowingly paying for my own humiliation, funding the lifestyle that allowed him to steal my wife. The total came to $237,000, almost $250,000 that she'd stolen and funneled to her boyfriend over 3 years. But it got better, so much better. I started digging into Caleb's employment, and the universe gifted me with the kind of irony that makes you believe in karma. The company where Linda worked as marketing director was owned by a holding company. That holding company was part of a larger corporate structure that included multiple businesses. And one of those businesses was a construction supply firm. A construction supply firm that I was the primary supplier for. 80% of my metal products went to this one company. They were my biggest client by far. And through a convoluted web of corporate ownership and investment structures, I realized that Caleb's division only existed because of my work. He lived, ate, breathed, and bought his expensive suits with money that ultimately came from me. He'd thrown my own dollar at me while building his entire lifestyle on my steel and my sweat. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. Almost. I spent 2 weeks preparing, not just legally, but strategically. I met with every executive I'd ever worked with at the holding company. I reminded them how reliable I'd been, how my quality was unmatched, how difficult it would be to replace me. I didn't threaten. I didn't need to. They knew their supply chain depended on me. Then I called a board meeting. Official reason, reviewing supply contracts and discussing potential expansion of services. I insisted that all department heads be present, including marketing and regional management. The CEO agreed immediately. They valued my business too much to say no. The conference room at corporate headquarters was all glass and steel naturally. My steel, holding up their pretty building. The irony wasn't lost on me. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Atlanta. The table was polished mahogany that probably cost more than some people's cars. Everything about this room screamed money and power. I arrived early wearing my best suit, not a tuxedo this time, but a well-tailored charcoal gray that fit my broad shoulders properly. I'd gone to a real tailor, paid good money to look like I belonged here. I looked like what I was, a successful businessman who'd built something real from nothing. I carried a leather briefcase that contained everything I needed, every piece of evidence that would destroy them both. The executives filed in slowly, coffee cups in hand, making small talk. Professional smiles, corporate pleasantries. They had no idea what was coming. Linda arrived with her team, 3 junior marketers who followed her like ducklings. She was mid-laugh at something one of them said when she looked up and saw me sitting at the head of the table. The laugh died on her lips. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her coffee cup actually shook in her hand, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She probably assumed I'd be at home, licking my wounds, maybe crying into a beer. She hadn't expected to see me here, in her world, on her turf, sitting in the power position like I owned the place, which in a way, I did. Then Caleb walked in. He was laughing at something on his phone, his head down, not paying attention. He had that casual arrogance that comes from never expecting consequences. His suit was expensive, his watch was expensive, his shoes were expensive, all bought with my money, though he didn't know it yet. He looked up and locked eyes with me. The transformation was instant and spectacular. His face went from tan to chalk white in about 3 seconds flat. His mouth fell open. He actually stumbled, catching himself on the back of a chair, nearly knocking it over. The phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. The room noticed. Everyone turned to look at what had caused such a reaction. You could feel the tension ratchet up several notches, that electricity in the air that comes before something big happens. The CEO, a sharp woman named Patricia, who'd started as a secretary 30 years ago and clawed her way to the top through sheer determination, called the meeting to order. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd built this company from a regional supplier into a multi-state operation, and she didn't suffer fools or thieves. I waited patiently through the preliminaries, financial reports, quarterly projections, supply chain updates, boring corporate speak that meant nothing. Everyone was waiting for me to speak, to explain why I'd insisted on this meeting. The tension built with each passing minute. When it was finally my turn, I stood up slowly, took my time, let the silence stretch, walked around the table to where Caleb sat in his expensive leather chair. His eyes followed me like a trapped animal watching a predator approach. Sweat was beading on his forehead. His hands were gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles were white. The room went completely quiet. You could feel the tension like static electricity before a storm. Even the air conditioning seemed to go silent. I reached into my pocket and pulled out that crumpled, dirty $1 bill, the same one he'd thrown at me 2 weeks ago. I'd kept it in my wallet every single day since then, waiting for this exact moment. I'd touched it every morning, reminding myself why I was doing this, feeling that old anger and humiliation, letting it fuel me. I unfolded it carefully, taking my time, making everyone wait. Then I placed it on the polished mahogany table directly in front of him. It looked pathetic on that expensive wood, a crumpled piece of trash in a palace of power. "You forgot your change," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent room like a gunshot echoing off glass and steel. "And by the way, you're fired, with cause, effective immediately. I've already discussed it with Patricia. If I hear about any company in this state, hell, in this region hiring you, I'll consider it a personal insult to my business relationship with them, and I'll reconsider who I supply my steel to. Are we clear?" Caleb opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at Patricia. She nodded slowly. She'd already made her choice. My steel was worth infinitely more to her than his mediocre management skills. "Mr. Reynolds," Patricia said formally, "your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll receive information about your final paycheck and benefits through mail." 2 security guards appeared at the door, like they'd been waiting for their cue. They probably had been. They moved to either side of Caleb's chair. He looked around the room desperately, seeking an ally, someone who'd defend him. Every pair of eyes looked away. "You can't do this," he finally managed to say. "I'll sue. You'll do nothing," I interrupted, "unless you want me to press charges for receiving stolen funds. See, my wife there has been embezzling money from our joint accounts and funneling it to your consulting company. I have documentation going back 3 years. Every wire transfer, every fake invoice, every dollar she stole from me that ended up in your pocket. Patricia has copies. So do the police." Linda made a sound like a wounded animal. Caleb's face went from white to green. The security guards took his arms, and he didn't resist. He was too shocked, too broken. They walked him out like a prisoner, and that's exactly what he was, a prisoner of his own greed and stupidity. The door closed behind him, and I turned to Linda. She was still sitting there frozen, tears streaming down her face in mascara-black rivers. "You're next," I said simply. Then I looked at Patricia. "I assume you'll want to conduct your own investigation into Ms. Brooks's activities?" "It's already underway," Patricia said coolly. "And Linda, you're suspended without pay pending the results. I suggest you retain legal counsel. Linda stood up on shaking legs and walked out without a word. The room stayed silent until her footsteps faded away. Then Patricia turned to me with something that almost looked like respect. Well played, Ethan. I appreciate you handling this with some discretion, bringing it to us directly rather than going public immediately. It could have been much messier. I'm a businessman, I said. Messy is bad for business. Besides, I like working with you. I'd hate to have to find new clients. She laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension in the room. Oh, I think our relationship is secure. Shall we discuss that contract expansion you mentioned? We spent the next hour talking business, real business, not corporate backstabbing and affairs. By the time I left that building, I had a new contract worth 40% more than my old one and exclusive supplier status for 3 years. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of betrayal and humiliation had been replaced by something else. Not happiness exactly, but satisfaction. The kind of satisfaction that comes from a job well done. The divorce proceedings were brutal, efficient, and devastatingly one-sided. The courtroom was sterile and cold, all wood paneling and fluorescent lights. Linda sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, a young guy fresh out of law school who'd taken her case pro bono, probably hoping for exposure. He was in way over his head and knew it within the first 10 minutes. Marcus laid it all out for the judge like he was presenting a murder case. The infidelity, supported by hotel receipts, photographs, witness statements. The embezzlement, documented with bank statements showing every transfer, every fake invoice, every stolen dollar. Text messages between Linda and Caleb that made it crystal clear the affair had been going on for years. Photos from their weekend getaways, smiling and wrapped around each other while I was home working. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, irrefutable. We had bank statements showing $237,000 in transfers to shell companies Linda had created. We had corporate credit card bills for dinners and hotels, supposedly business expenses that were actually funding her affair. We had testimony from her own coworkers who'd seen them together, who'd known about the affair and said nothing. We had text messages where she laughed about me, called me a mindless worker bee, mocked my profession, planned rendezvous with her lover using my money. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that she deserved half of everything because Georgia was an equitable distribution state. Marcus shut that down fast, his voice booming through the courtroom like thunder. He pointed out that she'd already taken far more than half illegally, that she'd stolen from her husband while carrying on an affair, that she'd betrayed every vow she'd ever made. The prenup we'd signed years ago, which Linda had insisted on ironically, had an infidelity clause she'd apparently forgotten about. It stipulated that if either party cheated, they forfeited all claims to joint assets. She'd gotten cocky, thought she was untouchable, thought I was too stupid to ever figure it out. Her lawyer tried a different tack, claiming emotional distress, claiming I'd been neglectful, claiming she'd been driven to seek comfort elsewhere. The judge, a woman in her 60s with no patience for excuses, shut him down with a look that could have frozen fire. Linda sat there throughout it all, shrinking into her chair with each revelation. She'd aged years in the weeks since I'd kicked her out. Her expensive clothes couldn't hide the weight she'd lost, the dark circles under her eyes, the tremor in her hands. She tried to maintain her composure, but I watched it crack piece by piece. When they showed the text messages where she'd called me degrading names, where she'd laughed about me with Caleb, she actually started crying. Real tears this time, not the fake ones she'd tried on me. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the mountain of evidence Marcus presented, and made her decision in less than 15 minutes. When you have truth and documentation on your side, justice moves fast. Linda got nothing. No house, no alimony, no split of assets. The judge ruled that she'd forfeited all rights through her actions. She was ordered to repay the money she'd stolen, which came to $237,000 plus interest. Since she didn't have it, since she'd already spent it on her affair and Caleb's failing business, she was on the hook for a debt that would follow her for decades. The judge also ordered her to pay my legal fees, which came to another $30,000. $250,000 in debt with no job, no prospects, no way to pay it back. But more than the money, more than the house, what Linda lost was her reputation. In the business world, especially in Atlanta's tight corporate circles where everyone knows everyone, word spreads faster than wildfire. People talk. They always talk. They gossip over lunch, share stories at networking events, warn each other about bad actors. By the end of that week, everyone in her professional network knew what she'd done. The marketing director who'd stolen company money to support her lover, the woman who'd embezzled from her husband while cheating on him, the executive who'd betrayed both her employer and her marriage. Nobody wanted to touch her with a 10-foot pole. Job applications went unanswered. Professional contacts stopped returning calls. Her LinkedIn profile went silent after she was tagged in multiple posts about corporate fraud and ethics violations. Patricia had launched an internal investigation after my revelation in the boardroom. They found that Linda had been charging personal expenses to corporate cards for years. Dinners with Caleb billed as client meetings, hotel rooms for their affairs marked as conference expenses. She'd stolen from the company too, not just from me. Patricia fired her for cause, which meant no severance, no unemployment benefits, no references. Just a permanent black mark on her professional record. As for Caleb, his fall was even more spectacular, like watching a skyscraper implode in slow motion. Getting fired with cause meant no unemployment benefits, no severance package, nothing but a cardboard box of personal belongings and a security escort to the parking lot. His prestige consulting company was revealed as a front for receiving stolen money, a facade with no real business behind it. The clients he'd claimed to have didn't exist. The projects he'd bragged about were fiction. It was all smoke and mirrors, built on money he'd convinced my wife to steal from me. The IRS got involved because he hadn't properly reported the income Linda had funneled to him. Turns out when you receive $250,000 through shell companies and don't declare it, the federal government takes an interest. Tax evasion carries serious penalties. He was looking at fines, back taxes with interest, and possible criminal charges. His expensive lifestyle collapsed like a house of cards. The leased BMW got repossessed when he couldn't make payments. The luxury apartment in Buckhead? Gone. Evicted for non-payment after 3 months. His credit cards were maxed out, his bank accounts empty. Everything he'd had was built on borrowed money and stolen funds. And when that dried up, he had nothing. I heard through the grapevine, through Rachel, who kept tabs on both of them for me, that he'd fled to Florida about 4 months after the boardroom incident, trying to start over where nobody knew his name or his story. But the internet is forever, and word travels. A simple Google search of his name brought up articles about the embezzlement, the affair, the firing. Any potential employer who did basic due diligence would find the scandal. Last I checked, and I'll admit I checked occasionally just to see Karma at work, he was tending bar at some tourist trap in Miami Beach, living in a studio apartment that probably ate up half his income, working nights, cleaning up after drunk tourists, living paycheck to paycheck, all those expensive suits gathering dust in a closet because he couldn't afford dry cleaning. All that arrogance beaten down by reality. The man who'd thrown $1 at me was now grateful for dollar tips from strangers. The sweetest part? He couldn't escape it. The hospitality industry is small, and people talk. Eventually, someone at the bar would recognize him, remember the story, and word would spread. He'd have to move again, find a new job, start over in a new city, and the pattern would repeat. He'd made himself notorious, and that kind of reputation follows you forever. Karma, they call it. I call it consequences. The universe has a way of balancing the scales if you're patient enough to wait for it. 6 months after everything came crashing down, I'm standing at the gates of my shop, watching the sun set over Birmingham. The sky is painted in shades of orange and red, the color of steel heated to the perfect temperature for shaping, for molding into something new and stronger. The evening air carries the familiar smell of metal and machine oil, and I breathe it in like it's the finest perfume money can buy. This is my world. This is where I belong. Not in glass towers or corporate boardrooms, but here where things are built, where honest work creates something lasting. Business is better than ever. That new contract I negotiated with Patricia brought in enough work to hire 5 more workers, good people who appreciate steady employment and fair wages. We're building structures that'll stand for generations, bridges that'll carry thousands of cars, framework for buildings that'll house families and businesses. That's legacy. That's real success. Not corporate titles and fake smiles and backstabbing your way to the top. The shop floor is busier now, alive with the sound of creation. Young Marcus, the kid I hired fresh out of technical school, is turning into a hell of a welder. He reminds me of myself 30 years ago, rough around the edges but solid where it counts. He's got good hands, a straight look in his eye, and that hunger to build something real. I'm teaching him everything I know, passing on skills that matter, knowledge that can't be downloaded or learned from a book. I heard through mutual acquaintances, people who still had contact with Linda's old world, that she's living in a cheap extended stay motel on the outskirts of Atlanta, the kind of place where people go when they've run out of better options, working part-time at a call center for $12 an hour, taking abuse from customers who treat her like she once treated service workers. She sold her beloved white Mercedes to pay lawyers who couldn't save her. That car she'd loved more than me, gone to help pay the debts she'd racked up. Her fair-weather friends vanished the moment her money and status disappeared. Funny how that works. The people she'd looked down on, the simple working-class folks she'd mocked and dismissed, they're the ones with real loyalty, real relationships, real lives. The wealthy socialites she tried so hard to impress, they dropped her like a hot potato the second the scandal broke. Nobody wants to be associated with a thief and a cheater. It might rub off. I ran into one of her old coworkers at a business meeting last month, a woman named Jennifer who'd been in Linda's department. She mentioned almost casually that Linda had tried to friend request people on Facebook, tried to reconnect with old colleagues. Everyone ignored her. She'd burned those bridges so thoroughly, there was nothing left but ash. She brought it on herself, Jennifer said, shaking her head. We all knew she looked down on people, thought she was better than everyone else. The way she talked about you, she trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Ethan. We should have said something, but nobody wants to get involved in other people's marriages. I appreciated the sentiment, even if it was years too late to matter. My phone's been buzzing lately with texts from old friends, people I'd lost touch with during the marriage when Linda had been isolating me from anyone she considered beneath her status. They'd heard about the divorce through the grapevine and were reaching out, offering support, inviting me to barbecues and fishing trips. How are you holding up? They ask. Are you okay? You need anything? I appreciate the concern, but the truth is, I'm better than okay. I'm free. Free from the constant criticism, the feeling of never being good enough, the weight of loving someone who viewed me as an embarrassment. Free from walking on eggshells in my own home, from the cold silences and cutting remarks. Free from being someone's provider, meal ticket, and punching bag all rolled into one. The shop has become my sanctuary again, not an escape from an unhappy home, but a place where I genuinely want to be. I work late sometimes, not because I have to, but because I enjoy it. The satisfaction of creating something from nothing, of taking raw materials and shaping them into structures that will outlast me. There's honor in that, purpose, meaning that no corporate job could ever provide. I reach into my pocket and feel that dollar bill. I still carry it, not because I need the money or because I want to remember the humiliation. I carry it as a reminder of something important. Cheap people always cost too much in the end, but the real price isn't paid in money. It's paid in dignity, integrity, honor. That dollar represents the exact moment I stopped being naive. The moment I understood that some people will take your kindness for weakness, your patience for stupidity, your loyalty for granted. Caleb thought he could buy me off with $1 and steal my wife. Linda thought she could have her cake and eat it too, playing the successful businesswoman while robbing me blind. They both learned the same lesson. You can't cheat an honest man forever. Eventually the bill comes due, and when it does, interest compounds fast. There's a young guy starting at the shop tomorrow, fresh out of technical school, eager to learn the trade. His name's Marcus, same as my lawyer, which makes me smile. He reminds me of myself 30 years ago, rough around the edges but solid where it counts. He's got good hands, a straight look in his eye, and that hunger to build something real. I'm going to teach him everything I know. How to read metal, how to make perfect welds, how to build structures that last. But I'm also going to teach him something else, something they don't cover in school, how to recognize people who don't respect honest work, how to spot a con before it costs you everything, and how to never, ever let anyone make you feel small because you work with your hands instead of pushing papers. The sun's almost down now, and the first stars are appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow's another day of work, another day of building, another day of living honestly in a world that often rewards the opposite. But that's fine. I sleep well at night. Can Linda say the same? Can Caleb? I doubt it. I turn away from the sunset and head back into the shop. There's a beam I need to finish before tomorrow, and I like to do my final inspections when I'm alone, when I can focus completely on the work. Every weld gets checked, every measurement verified, every detail perfect, because that's who I am. That's what I do. I build things that last. And I destroyed two people who thought they could break me.